happens is there's about 5 minutes for Kempville to set up their debrief exercise and for them to begin. We're going to be going into them in about 5 minutes, but we can take the next 5 minutes just to talk about what your reactions were to those two films. Two very different films. It was great that we had them side by each because two of the first one would have been very difficult, and it was nice to have that comedy come afterwards. So I know that you have sticky notes. If you want to take a moment and maybe write down, and thinking back on those two films, Merck, the first one, which talked about three very interesting young people whose lives were very challenged and made some different interesting choices with the challenges they were facing. And then if you also had some thoughts about what kind of messages you got from Evil. Evil is one of the waste films, and boy, that was made in Aurelia, in our Aurelia school, and boy, was a blast making that film. It really was. There was a great deal of ingenuity and creativity, obviously, that went into it. The interesting thing is I use that film a lot to talk about when you're thinking about what kind of actions you want to make a difference. Sometimes you just have to make them quirky, and quirky is cool. And quirky can make some very interesting things happen, rather than the same old action, the same old, mini-me kind of actions that we all tend to do. Oh, I think I should do this, I should do that. That film is very helpful in thinking about some different kinds of actions. So just want to take a moment and write down any thoughts you had on either Merck or Evo. And in a moment, hopefully we're going to have sound from Kempville, so we can listen to how they're processing those two films since they chose them. Also, when this is a great board that's up here, that when you're thinking about how you might want to reflect on these films, that there are some great questions up here. That when you look at your sticky notes, these are some of the questions you might wish to answer. What are the issues that you felt that film reflected? If the film has really impacted you, how has it affected you? Has it maybe changed you? What you'd like to see more of, having reflected on that film? What was the big idea that really you were left with, the key message that you were left with? So these are some really, really great questions, because sometimes we can give initial reactions and we have a gut feel, a gut reaction. Sometimes it's really helpful to have some stimulating questions that will guide us, because we really, really do want to get your input in terms of how do these films talk to you. And so how do you establish trust when you're in a dynamic like that? It's so difficult, because if you're in that dynamic of either you're dealing with drug issues, or you're dealing with abandonment issues, or you're dealing with rape or whatever else, you're in a very different mindset. And so it takes very specialized kind of care on a long-term kind of basis often to be able to have that kind of trust. And I know that Jillian's organization works extensively in how do you build that kind of trust. One thing that struck me was parental abandonment. That was like, where were the parents? In all the cases, it was like here's $100, have a good week. The other one with the eviction, and the rape victim obviously was struggling with how to even have a connection with herself, let alone her own family. Again, those are very dynamic, and how many of you in reflecting on those scenarios, how many of you have been touched either personally or you're aware of people who have been involved in those types of situations? Hands up. It's prevalent, and what's a reaction to our society. One of the interesting things before we go to Evil for a moment, so we're not technology anonymous. We do talk about it. All right. Yes.
I just to make, and I would argue that our generation is not slaves to technology. I would argue that our parents' generations were slaves to technology. And the reason I say this is because it was our parents' generation that consistently had to buy records. It was our parents' generation who consistently had to buy those little tape decks, who had to buy CDs, who had to buy all of this stuff. Because there were people at the top who created that, and our parents had to buy it. I would argue that our generation is taking back technology because it's our generation that has YouTube. We can create our own movies because we have laptops and we have the technology to make our own media. So we have the ability to pirate music. We have the ability to download LimeWire. We have the ability to essentially control corporations like iTunes and what we want. So I would argue that it was our parents' generation who actually were slaves to technology, and I would argue that it's our generation that's actually taking that back.
My generation was the slave to technology. Your generation owns technology. How do you guys feel about that?
I'm wondering if you could do a show of hands, just a poll at Sutton and Keswick. How many people there, how many of your students there have ever had serious conversations with friends around their use of technology? You do a poll? So quite a few hands at Sutton, I don't see, and at Keswick as well.
Yeah, we have about over 50.
Wow, so these are conversations that are happening despite the fact that we are apparently slaves, addicted, and obsessed. Okay, that's all I wanted to see for now. Thank you very much.
We had a number of artists who have been painting their impressions about what they heard and what they felt from watching the series of films. So we're now going to pan over, if we can, to the canvas, and you're going to see 4 artists' interpretation of what they felt the messages from this series of films were. Can you see that? Can we wave hands? Can you see the art? No see art? Can you see the art? I'm going to ask the artist.
Yes, we can see it in Unionville. Sorry.
Sorry. Okay. So what we're going to end this with a brief, very brief description from the artists in terms of why they painted these impressions of the films that we watched this morning. I'm going to hold the mic for you.